Now we're going to recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've about worn this out. We've covered everything from Iraq to the fact, I think, that Mr. Meadows established very clearly that we were lied to by this administration, perhaps even with contempt. But I want to go to something else that I think is really at the core of what we ought to be talking about. And that is that a key promise from the administration is that the Iran nuclear deal would provide the public and lawmakers with assurance that Iran was meeting its obligation and Iran's ability to engage in proliferation would be substantially mitigated. I mean, we can go back to the Rhodes Statement about that it would be the strongest inspection regime that any country faces in the world. We could go to what the State Department posted on the website, that the International Atomic Energy Agency would have regular access to all of Iran's nuclear facilities, that they'd be providing the IAEA with much greater access, that it would require that they be granted access to investigate suspicious sites or allegations of covert enrichment. But that's not what's actually happened. I want to share with you that after the deal was implemented, the International Atomic Energy Agency published its regular report on Iran. I think it came out in February. And the report contained less information than the IAEA had regularly provided about Iran before the deal was in place. In fact, when asked about these gaps, IAEA Director General Amano said that, in fact, the deal restricted the IAEA's ability to report publicly about Iran's nuclear program. Mr. Rubin, given that, how much confidence do you have in this deal?
I have very little confidence in this deal for reasons that I've outlined in my written testimony. It falls far short of the most rigorous inspection regime ever, and the danger isn't just in Iran, very briefly. The danger is that it permanently dilutes the standard by which other potential proliferators are held.
But would you agree that General Amano's statement validates the concerns that you expressed about the deal from the very beginning?
Yes, I would.
Would you also say that, given this statement from General Amano, that the exaggerated concessions that this administration claims that they obtained might be called into question as well?
Yes, I would.
You know, we've been talking about echo chambers. We've talked about misrepresentations. I go back to the statement that Secretary of State Kerry made, that he was the chief negotiator. We know that the framework of the deal was already in place before he really got involved. These statements that have been brought out in the New York Times Magazine article. But what we really haven't talked about is the fact that the deal is a fraud. And Iran could be on a path to a nuclear weapon. And here's something else that we really haven't discussed that I think we need to be talking about too, is that according to Ben Rhodes, that this deal also is part of a plan to abandon our friends and allies in the Middle East. Does that give you some concern, Mr. Rubin?
Yes, it does.
How about you, Mr. Duran?
Absolutely.
How about you, Mr. Hanna?
Yes, very much so.
Do you believe that the Obama administration withheld information from Congress about the deal intentionally?
Yes, I do.
Do you believe that was in violation of the Corker-Cardin agreement, the law that he signed into law himself?
It absolutely was, and on top of which, the Corker-Cardin amendment was written in such a way to prevent this from happening. And unfortunately, the administration simply broke the law.
I couldn't agree more. Peter Roskam, a gentleman from Illinois, introduced a House resolution and argued that very point. The House passed that resolution that this deal was illegal from the get-go, because the Corker-Cardin law required that all information be provided to Congress, including the side agreements, and it clearly wasn't. I think there's one issue, really one question that we need to ask, and I'll ask each one of you to answer this. Do you believe this deal has actually assured Iran a path to developing a nuclear weapon?
Yes, at the very least, it leaves Iran with an industrial-scale nuclear program upon the expiration of the controls, and the administration went into this knowing that the Iranian regime was not moderate.
Mr. Duran,
I agree with all that.
Mr. Hanna.
Yes, I agree with Michael's conclusion.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure it's the jurisdiction of this committee to look into the ramifications of that possibility, but I do think that's essentially what we should have been talking about this entire time. And the fact that this administration misled Congress is one issue that I think we need to pursue, but I think at some point Congress needs to look at what our positions ought to be going forward in regard to Iran. I yield back.